We would like to welcome Betty Wilson Hoover, who has graciously agreed to talk with us about the history of Bellaire. This project, A Living History of Bellaire, is sponsored by Bellaire Public Library, and it's funded by a grant from Next Level Leadership, University of Michigan. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, just tell me, you've been here for 12 years, and what have you done in those 12 years? Well, what made you interested in Bellaire history?
Oh, I call myself a history nut because that was my favorite subject all the way through school, and 2 years of college. I was 2 years into college at Wayne State, hoping to become a librarian.
Hi.
And librarian classes, well, I love books. I can't remember not reading. And there's several library stories connected with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember the first time I went in, I was so happy to get into the public library, which had just been established in the basement of the community hall.
Mm-hmm.
And Mrs. Short was the librarian. And because we rode a school bus, we had to have permission slip from our mother to not get on the bus to go home. So that was a big deal. That was the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And of course the second step was going to the library. And Mrs. Short had her rules. And I quickly found out she would not allow me to take any book out that was not suitable for my chronological age. So that, to me, turned it off, because she had no idea what I'd been reading, because I read my mother's books that she brought back from Europe, and they were mostly English publishers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I read, and it didn't matter what it was, I read it. And she did not check my background, nothing.
Mm.
And I remember, okay, that was my first and last trip to a public library, because I had to walk 2 miles home. Because obviously the bus, I was excused, but I do remember having a bad temper.
Mm.
And it was an interesting walk home, because I didn't want to talk to anybody, because I would have killed them. So that was my first library experience, which was not a good one. And we've talked to other people who are in libraries, and we laugh. We say, if they say, "Oh, give up your card," well, you can have my driver's license, but you can't have my library card.
I get it.
In the library in St. Clair Shores, I haunted it. Also interesting experiences, because I was accused of stealing a book. And my defense was, if I was going to steal a book, I wouldn't steal that piece of crap.
I'm sure they didn't really appreciate your honesty at that point.
Oh, no, they did not. They did not. They finally found the book. It had been misfiled and shelved in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. But I was so incensed to be accused of stealing a book when there was some. But their experience was that people do steal the book. Mm-hmm. And then when they're caught, they're willing to pay because they can't buy it. It's out of print. But now they had it, so they were quite willing. I hadn't heard that experience. But that was later in life.
So yeah. when you got to Bellaire, how did you get involved with the Historical Museum?
Oh, because I'm a pushy old broad. Cheryl Boris had kept it going for years, and bless her heart, it wouldn't have existed if she hadn't given everything she had to that museum. But the interesting, she was getting physically unable to do all that she had done before. So I kind of weaseled my way in and became president, which you could say, okay, it really was a dictatorship. Because I didn't accept much. I didn't have regular meetings with the board members because I found out real quick, if you want to get something done, just go ahead and do it. You know, that famous quote from a Navy lady. It's much easier to apologize than
Get permission.
yes, after it's done your way, then you can apologize.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. It still is to me, the history of Bellaire. But my mother had grown up here.
Okay.
She and I had attended the same schoolhouse. And they lived 2.5 miles out of town from 1905, so that's where she grew up. So I can't imagine the bravery as a single person earning enough money teaching school to get on a ship to go to Spain and find the man she was going to marry. But when 1929 came along, there was no job. Although Studebaker did send all their household goods at no charge. But my mother had said, I'm going home. And my dad said, well, I want to stay in Spain. And she said, fine, I'm taking the kids and leaving. He came along. And I can't imagine the shock to him, who spoke 5 languages, and end up in Bellaire as a foreigner. And he was treated as such. The only people who really talked to him were school teachers.
That's too bad.
Yeah, well, it was part of life.
Yeah.
Then he got jobs, and that's when he was working for a firm that was renovating Fort Custer because of World War II. And of course, that's Battle Creek. So
Right.
he had a full-time job, which was unique in itself. So that's why we left Bellaire
Okay.
in my junior year of high school.
Oh my.
So my senior year was spent at Battle Creek Central, which was scary as heck. They had more kids than Bellaire had population. My adventures in school did not start well. Kindergarten was okay. First grade, we had a teacher who I've met other of her students, which was not a good experience. And I don't know if you want me to describe the experience or not.
No, well, whatever you want to talk about.
It, because it set the tone between me and teachers for the rest of my life. She got angry because too many children had asked to go to the bathroom. So she said, no more. Well, I hadn't met anything like that before. And I had raised my hand, and she said no. Well, the consequences were, and she announced to the whole class, oh, that poor thing wet her pants. That did it. I never trusted another teacher.
Oh no.
No, I couldn't.
You said your
Because
mom?
that was my introduction to an adult that was doing things that I had never experienced. And that set the tone for my school years.
Oh no. No, you said your mom was a teacher?
She taught, yes, a one-room school.
So what did she
where
think
one
about?
of the students was twice her size. But that's how she earned money to pay her passage to Spain.
Okay. What did she think about the school system that you were dealing with as a child?
Oh, you never told. No, she never knew, because I didn't tell her. Because we were raised to not tell things.
So what did you, as a child, what did you do for fun then?
Well, we had neighbor girls, the Burnett's, they had two girls, and they were the same age as myself and my sister. And that was, we did different things, some of what we should not have been doing. Like swinging in the barn on ropes. Laura Bell fell and broke her leg. I thought, Laura Bell always had a problem.
Laura Bell, your sister?
No, she
Oh,
was a
friends.
brunette. So
Okay.
that was our only neighbors.
Oh, okay.
We never had any boys in the neighborhood. So it was the two girls and us. And we used to try and play baseball. In the winter, we created a nice slide down the hill for our sleds. But we always had to have, a bump in it so we'd be flying through the air. My poor dad had to rebuild that sled every year. But it was the fastest and the nicest sled.
Now, did you live outside of town?
We were 2.5 miles, a little bit more than 2 miles out of town,
Okay.
on the west side of M88.
Okay.
So when rural electrification came along, everybody got lights on the other side of the road. But we were the only house on the wrong side of the road, so it was almost a year later when we got electric lights,
Oh, wow.
because we lived all those years by lamps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember those well. Because my dad was very quick to excuse you from the table if you weren't eating correctly. So that got passed down to my daughters, who were not allowed. You ate correctly.
Oh.
And now it's gone down to the great grandchildren. That this is how you sit at the table, and this is the way you use your silverware.
So what are one of the most interesting things about Bellaire history that you've learned since you've been at the museum? What's
Oh.
fascinating to you?
What's fascinating to me is one of the things that in 1879, the town was named Keno. I have searched and searched, because to me that's a gambling term.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, how could that possibly be? And somebody said it's an Indian term. Well, I have found names very close to Keno. But it was a town celebration that was celebrated by the villagers when they changed the name. And part of the celebration was a lot of balloons with the name Keno on them. And at a certain point, everybody let their balloons go, and here's Keno, it's gone. It never had a post office, so it wasn't, on the register, but they changed the name to Bellaire in 1879. It's a cute, not to me, an interesting story. But they all got together, and that's how they celebrated. At the signal, everybody let their balloon go, and there went Keno. And Bellaire, named Good Air.
Oh.
Somebody came up with that.
Well, that's interesting because Chamber has the fresh air promotion. So that's kind of a take on the name. I didn't realize that.
Yes.
That's very cool. Anything else? Anything else that...
Well, it was interesting because there is a big discussion about who really settled Bellaire.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gotten to the point where everybody believes that it was the Southern Irish.
Oh.
Actually, it was the Northern Irish. Central Lake used to celebrate Orange Day.
Oh.
Yes. They did it once or twice, which was a big, big celebration in Central Lake. Orange Day, Orange Wednesday. So to me, that like okay, and yeah, there's a lot of Irish in Michigan, a lot, but they didn't all come from Southern Ireland. But again, very late in life, when I've been to Ireland 3 times, but I remember my first time there, and as I'm exiting the airport, they said, "And what's your destination?" And I said, "Londonderry." And he said, "Excuse me, you're going where?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to Derry." I caught it right away. He didn't want to hear London. So it still goes on over there, but whatever. But anyway, that was one of the things that, in '79 became Antrim County center for the county, which there a long drawn out discussion between Bellaire and Elk Rapids, where it had been. And one of the powers to be in Elk Rapids refused to turn over the books. So that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Michigan, where they said, give them up. And one of our early pioneers was Roswell Levitt, who was a lawyer. Bought up a lot of, no dummy, he bought up a lot of land, and he built the second hotel in Bellaire. And that's where his wife passed away when the youngest son was very young. But he had his 2 sons that he raised in that hotel. But you're very tall and wore stovepipe hat. Okay. So any pictures you see of Bellaire and you can't identify, you could always identify him. But he was a power to be, but he was a lawyer. Started in Elk Rapids and moved to Bellaire and invested his money wisely by buying a lot of land. So we joke about, another lady that she still works at the museum. Roswell Levitt was a fascination, raising, he married again, and her name is never mentioned. And we didn't really know he had married again until we ran across a legal document which had her name on it. Yeah, the history of women, and really well documented in how Bellaire grew or not, when women had no power whatsoever. And then you begin to realize, if you read that very carefully, they could not buy anything in a store unless their husband had an account. And they could charge it to his account. But them personally coming in and handing over cash to buy something, no. That was not done. The man had the power of the purse.
So when did that start to change? Probably World War II, I'm going to guess.
Well, you begin to understand why the women marched. Because their man would go to the bar that had free food. Ha ha ha. And spend their paycheck before they even got anywhere near their home. So that's why the wives got together and became a dry town.
Really?
Bellaire was dry.
Huh.
It was voted in. East Jordan was not dry. So there was a certain livery barn that delivered all over the county, and they always managed to bring something home. The name is still active in Bellaire. But that was one of the interesting things that came out by the family that had the business in the second part, where the pharmacy is now, was their business. And the basement, of course, on their side was a true basement. And she is the mother of Petunia, the pig that was walked up and down the streets.
I've heard about Petunia.
And she lived on the second floor.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And her litter box was in the kitchen. And I had the good fortune to talk with this lady. The names have just gone. But about her experiences living there.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was the Steffens who owned a grocery store. And they wanted their son and his family to move to Bellaire, so they bought that business for them. In the meantime, their son died, but they still asked the widow to come, which she did. And I think she remarried, and they had the business. They had the first bowling alley. But their daughter's memories are hilarious, involving Petunia the pig. And she was a very adventuresome girl. She found if she rode her bicycle out to the stables, which are in the same place now, if she would clean out the stalls, she'd get a free ride. So that's what she would do. But also, she was the one, they had a lot of rats in the basement, and her stepfather, I'm assuming a stepfather, and her brother would set the traps, but they wouldn't touch them if they caught a rat. So her job was to empty the traps. In the meantime, she could hear what was going on in the basement under the bank after hours, when they had some libation and they'd get to talking. And of course, she could hear all that. She says, Betty, I can't tell you because some of them are still alive. I can't repeat it. But I had just, and her brother is a podiatrist in Traverse City, but that was a few years ago. But when Joe Short bought that building, the architect came to the museum, and I rarely question people, but he was asking for such specific things. I said, why? And he said, well, Joe wants that building renovated, but he wants it historically accurate. And I thought, whoa, this is really something. Historically accurate. Well, he was trying to find pictures of any part of it, you know. And fortunately, I had borrowed from Mary Kay's husband, I had a whole stack of glass plates. And wouldn't you know, one of them was a picture taken it must have been the day that building was finished.
Oh.
Which perfectly showed the front. And that's why the railing is there and the business down there, because there always were businesses under the main bank, including a blind shoemaker who, you know, not to say blind. Yes, he was deaf and blind. He had been trained to make shoes. And he had a very active business. And in church, you kind of get a drift who gives a darn about Bellaire, and I knew this gentleman did. So I said, can you tell me anything about this shoemaker? He says, well, I guess so. He's my uncle.
Perfect.
So I learned a little bit more about this gentleman's character. And he was always in the phone book, although he couldn't answer the phone. That was just advertising. So you just find out all kinds of things. And to me, it's all connected. It's a single thread. But it's interesting what piles up on that thread, including in front of the community hall at the fountain. There used to be a veterans corner because on the day the mail came in is when they would get their checks.
Oh.
But that's where they would stand and wait for the
Oh,
post office. So
no.
the parents kind of put a stop to that.
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
you know, my mother, for the years that she went to school in that building, they had to come by horse,
Oh, okay.
horse-drawn
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
wagon or whatever. So that's why there were 3 livery stables,
Got it.
because you had to put them somewhere
Right.
until school was
Was
over.
out.
So that was another part of the livery story in Bellaire. There are so many. Now, my memory of the post office, the U.S. government, in approaching World War II, gave non-citizens so many months to become citizens, not even become citizens, no, that was not it. It was to register. So you had to go to the post office and be fingerprinted, which was the joy of my life. I was the only one that, you know, because my sisters were younger. I had missed it by a year. I had to go register as an enemy alien.
Really?
Yes, and because we had no birth certificate, my mother had the pastor of the Methodist Church prove in writing that we were born.
Now, you were born in Spain, obviously.
Yes, yes, yes. So he graciously did.
So are you a U.S. citizen, or are you a dual citizenship, or?
No, at that time they didn't do such things. At that time the U.S. government said, wherever you were born, that's what you were.
Huh.
Period. So they chose that I was a Spaniard, which of course I had no Spanish blood at all. Still haven't found any. Yeah, so that was my experience with the post office. But that's why the veterans would collect, Civil War veterans
Right.
would collect on the corner waiting for the
Wow.
post office to open.
Wow.
It wasn't very large, but that was the first post office that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, previous to that, there was a post office, but it was in the barber shop on the other side of the street. And I have gone to the post office and asked them if they had any history of their movements. No, we don't keep anything like that. And I thought, Then I found out from a lawyer, no, they don't. They don't want anybody to know. So I could spot the post office was right beside what is now Shorts.
Okay.
That was one of its locations. And then this one is a new one,
Mm-hmm.
which my mother had trouble with because a friend of hers tried to get in the post office and the doors were so heavy she broke her arm. But they still haven't changed those doors. But whatever, you know.
So what kinds of goodies did you bring that you had? You said you had some abstracts?
Yes, with President Grant.
Oh, my. So it's property.
Well, and I also, you know, it's much too big, but, you know, in 1891 the village was incorporated, so I have a copy of the first plaque. Those people really had great visions for the development,
Did they?
because the first plat is huge.
This is fascinating.
Well, it is to me. There is this copy at the museum,
Oh, the original.
but that's the first plat.
Look at that. The fact that it hasn't fallen apart's amazing.
Yes. And the amazing thing is, because I haunted Miller's Antiques um, he finally accepted me.
Oh,
And
decided you were
he would
safe?
have things set aside for me because I never argued price.
Oh,
The price was on it was what I paid him,
right.
and most people don't do that.
No.
So he did learn to appreciate me, and that's how I got that.
So were these lots all actually homes, or they were just?
No, this is a vision.
Oh.
This is a vision.
Oh
But
wow.
that's how large the plat was.
Oh wow. And that's what they kind of
Not
thought.
that
how
it
they-
happened.
But
Pieces
this is-
dropped
yeah.
off here, pieces dropped
Right.
off there. But this was their vision.
So Richard.
Yes, that's an interesting
Richard
story
I,
too,
yeah.
because the partners met in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh.
And were trying to figure out how to make money. And they had read something about how wonderful Bellaire was and how big the forests were.
Ooh.
So that was why they came and started the mill,
Okay.
which expanded and expanded.
Right.
The third time it burned, there wasn't enough forest left to bother.
Okay.
But it was the place of employment,
Okay.
naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, they let women work there in the clothespin division, which was up on the
Clothespin
third
division.
floor.
Of course.
Now, clothespins, to a lot of people, going to sound silly, but they actually filled railroad cars with clothespins.
Really.
They exported them.
Such a demand for them.
Yes, yes, yes. They had an agent in San Francisco, and the museum has a copy of his letter after the San Francisco earthquake and fires and everything that happened there, writing a letter and apologizing he hasn't been able to work to sell their wooden goods, which actually that factory sent wooden goods all over because they made bowls.
Oh.
They made, a lot of wooden stuff that
Right.
was ordinary to us.
Right.
Like, oh, why would you have that? And the museum has a complete wall of that. But it went all over, and some of them went to Europe. They had agent in Europe. So it was not a rinky-dink
No.
organization.
But
And
it's
then-
interesting to see the names that are still here,
Yes,
you know?
yes, yes.
In Court Square, isn't that interesting? That's got to be close to where the courthouse is.
Yeah, the courthouse was quite something.
Yeah.
And the brick came from East Jordan.
Did it?
Yes.
It's a beautiful building.
And one of the caretakers over there, and it's been a few years, time escapes me, but he guided me through the courthouse, and he said, you think the walls are straight, but they're not. You can tell where they had their lunch break. Great straight brick walls. They would have their lunch break, and somehow the wall became tilted a little bit this way or that way. And he says, there's not a straight wall in here.
It is a beautiful
But he
building.
loved
though.
that courthouse.
Yeah. It's
He
beautiful.
was very enthusiastic about it,
Yeah.
about the history of it, including the clock tower,
Oh,
where you would
right.
meet people. Yeah, my name is up there.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of names written in that tower.
Oh, people would climb up into it.
Oh,
and-
yes, yes, yes. But that's the first plat. It was very
Wow.
ambitious.
It was.
But I walked into Miller's Antiques one day, and he said, well, I've been up in the attic, and I think I have something for you.
Oh, man.
Because Dr. Miller, going way back to the 1700s, his family collected everything. Everything. A piece of paper here, and when Kalkaska cleaned out their old village hall, they were just throwing stuff out the window. Well, guess who was
Ready there to
at
catch
the
it.
bottom?
Well, thank goodness, though.
And when they changed the labels on the cherry cans, guess who took all the old labels? Dr. Miller did.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It is.
History family, because somehow he has letters going back to the 1700s.
I bet.
One of which I found particularly hilarious, about a place in Pennsylvania. And he said, everything was wonderful till the Methodists moved in. Now we can't dance, we can't drink.
Till the Methodists moved in.
But he still has the original letter.
Oh, wow.
And I haven't talked to him in a couple years, but he, bless his heart, he's the reason we have things
Museum.
at the museum. Because he finally decided that I was okay.
You would take care of things for
Well,
him.
he has a strange kind of a language like a lisp,
Oh, okay.
and he's not the most pleasant person to be around because
Okay.
he really resents the way he was treated.
It's hard to get over
Yeah.
stuff like that, though. Don't you think?
You don't.
Yeah, you don't.
But he ended up inheriting all of it
Oh, wow.
because he had taken care of the family for years.
That's precious. That's very cool.
And like I say, that I find these fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. This is, I mean, President Grant.
Right.
It's amazing. 1871.
Yeah. And here's another one from Grant. And here's another one.
So these are all titles.
Oh, and this is Grantor, United States of America.
Really? To who?
To the state of Michigan for use and benefit of the Grand Rapids and Indiana Railroad. Because at one time the railroad, all the land that Bellaire sits on,
Was owned by the railroad?
yes, it was a grant from the government because they needed people. They were concerned about the Canadians and the Indians moving back into Michigan and taking over. So one of the things they did was give the railroad all these grants, and then the railroad could sell the property.
Right.
Looked at it and said, no, it should
How
have
far
a
did the...
party.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I said, well, do you understand the movement of people in Europe at that time?
Right.
And if you moved from Italy to Germany, didn't take long before your name was modified.
Oh, of course.
But there is a book here in the library that there's a note about a nun who was in charge of something, and her name was Richard I.
Yep. Well, like I said, it took
And
me a while to
people
come.
move, but you don't realize that the Italian bankers moved,
Oh,
and it was money,
yeah. Yep.
which is the usual reason
Exactly.
people move.
Exactly.
But they did. I'm amazed, and you read some of these biographies, and you find out, well, yeah, he was a famous painter in Belgium. Well, he spent a lot of time in Italy, spent a lot of time in Spain, but, by horse or foot.
Right. Right.
But they moved.
Yep. Don't you find it amazing, too, that, I mean, people were going west. How'd they get north? You know what I mean, to Little Bellaire.
I find that totally fascinating.
Yeah.
One thing I found out in researching, and it was, on the edge yeah, beyond the edge of founding. That when I researched the merchants, I found out most of them came from the same place in New York.
Oh.
And I thought, well, New York State.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's weird. Wonder why. But then it was messages back come,
Oh,
they
right.
got opportunities here.
Yeah.
But then a friend who had done a lot of research, after the Erie Canal was built, this particular community in upper New York State realized if they built a canal, they could cook right up to the Erie Canal. And they did it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how these people from that town took a boat
All the way around.
all the way to Detroit.
Yep. Yep.
And then came to Bellaire because there was opportunity here.
Oh, yeah. Does it do in any of the history, do people talk about the lakes and the beauty and did that ever matter, or was it just the opportunity and the business?
Well, for that particular group, it was the business. So the earliest, the banking system was a private system. So a family could start a bank. And that family came from Ohio.
Okay.
But there were a lot of Ohio people that moved north, a lot. So that's another piece of Bellaire history, is the people out of Ohio. But you talk about, and incidentally, they do have CDs at the museum of interviewing people.
Up to 76, I understand.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then they quit doing it, which was a shame, but they're really great,
Yep.
really great.
Well, and I'm
But,
hoping to kind of combine those a little bit.
Yeah,
Because we should be able to work with the museum and digitize some of that too, so that if we digitize that and digitize these things, then we can have a little bit more of a complete history.
yeah. Well, even in my own family, my mother met my father at Fisherman's Paradise, which was the place to work, like Shanty Creek was. You tell people, well, I'm from Bellaire, and their eyes would glaze over, and where's that? Well, at a certain time, you could say, well, I know Shanty Creek.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's Shorts.
Yeah.
But that's Fisherman's Paradise, where my mother and her sister, Aunt Nora, worked there for quite some time. Aunt Clara had a job across the lake, so she would go to Fisherman's Paradise and get a rowboat and row over to work. Which was the shortest way to get there. It took far less time.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, that's how my dad was, I don't know why, but he was there as a mechanic taking care of the cars and trucks.
Okay.
And that's how he met the gentleman who was running Studebaker in Detroit,
Oh, okay.
who came up all the time.
Really?
And in the newspaper, Mr. Smith was not dumb either, but he would write his own column in the local paper about who came or who went fishing or who was entertaining the people. One of the Maltbys was quite involved in entertainment, singing, and instrument playing to entertain the people that were there, who came from all over.
So this has always been a little bit of a tourist area too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, later on, that's when the forest was gone, they had to find something. Because there was no profit in lumber,
Yeah.
or very little. But, yeah. And that's how he met the gentleman from Studebaker, who came to Fisherman's Paradise annually.
Mm-hmm.
That one time he motored up in his brand new Studebaker.
when cards were
But,
like
you know, reading the old newspapers is hilarious.
what people did and who had who for dinner and
And yes,
yes.
including somebody was seen at the railroad station with a hanky in their belt, which did not belong to them. And if it's not returned, your name will be published in the next paper. It got returned. I mean, you know. And some boys had broken into a personal boat and really had taken the ladies' bathing suit and put it on and took their picture. And they were so dumb that they had it developed here in Bellaire. And somehow it got to the person whose wife's bathing suit it was. So that was quite a great story in the
Yeah.
paper, too.
Had to report everything, didn't it?
Well, they did.
Yeah.
And Ira Adams was the owner of the paper, developer, but, you know, a story like when it became fishing season in the river, all the ladies would go fishing to catch breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was talking about some lady misstepped and got wet up to her neck.
Uh-oh.
I will not print her name, but if you call so-and-so.
They can tell you who it is.
He did have a wild sense of humor.
Oh my gosh.
But some of the stuff was absolutely hilarious. But Ira Adams was a very interesting gentleman running the newspaper, which incidentally was printed in, now I've forgotten her initials, but Mrs. White's building,
Oh.
which is still standing.
Oh, wow.
It's the one right next to the courthouse.
Oh, okay.
Which, bless her heart, she was unmarried. She had, her first store was on the other side of the street, and then she bought this building. But that lady donated 20 feet of her property so the community hall
Rebuilt.
could be that large.
Oh my. That's interesting.
But the building is still there. My aunt worked there. You know, a lot of people, it was a place to work.
Yep.
And I remember as a child we haunted it because there were free shows which would start when it was dark. But
Right.
you'd get there when it wasn't quite dark, but you'd go to Mrs. White's to buy candy.
Mm.
And I would stand there, I don't know how long, because I love licorice, still do. But anyway, it was between a licorice cigar and a licorice pipe, which had the most licorice.
Oh, okay.
So it was a very difficult choice for me. But then other people have told me that she was very careful about how she weighed things out.
Oh.
And if it was 2 or 3 ounces over, she'd take a piece off and bite it to get the correct weight. But she must have been quite a character, a single woman
Yeah.
in business when women supposedly couldn't do
Couldn't do anything.
She
Couldn't vote.
did.
Couldn't do anything.
She did.
That's amazing.
And I just find that absolutely amazing.
Yep.
And the fact that she donated 20 feet of her own property to the village so they could build the size that the architect had drawn.
Oh, that's amazing too.
It is. It
It
is.
is.
In the history of that building, that's where we used to have all the big school
Oh.
events.
Oh.
were
And which
held there.
building? You said it's still
It's
up.
a community hall, which
Oh.
is still, the village offices are still there.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
the police are still
Right, and the
there.
museum's in the basement.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
which was very gracious of them. They had no idea. Because, my gosh, they're still getting donations.
Yeah,
It just keeps flowing in.
I know. Well, people
As
are
people
fascinated.
clean out houses,
Right.
somebody dies and we got to get rid of all this stuff.
Yeah,
You know, I
Yeah.
have relatives that are going through that
yeah.
with Aunt Daisy's house.
Yep.
It'll always be Aunt Daisy's house. I don't care who.
Yep. Yep. I get it.
Yeah, and M88 was not the first road into Bellaire because it had too many hills.
Oh.
So they would come the back way around Stover
Oh, okay.
to the stagecoach
Right.
would come, and that's how it would come into Bellaire.
Mm-hmm.
M88 is a latecomer
Mm-hmm.
as far as roads.
Interesting.
And, well, my mind goes scattered. But Short's building and the big 3-story residence, yellow brick,
Right. Okay.
came from Grandpa's. I say Grandpa's Hill. No, there was a brick mill right at the foot of that hill,
Oh, okay.
which is all clay.
Right. Oh. Okay.
But they didn't fire it to make it red.